The recording of Jihoon's match spread across the Federation network within days. What had started as a university incident became a galactic event. The footage showed everything: the sustained running, the calculated pacing, the methodical exhaustion of 3 elite Vraxian warriors by a single unaugmented human with no weapons and no formal combat training. Students began analyzing the match in their xenobiology and military strategy classes. Commentators debated what it meant. Some species expressed renewed concern about humans. Others were fascinated by the demonstration of such an unusual evolutionary adaptation. The Vraxians themselves released an official statement, acknowledging the effectiveness of human endurance tactics and recommending that military protocols be updated to account for this capability, but the most significant response came from the Galactic Federation Council. 3 weeks after the match, an official summons arrived at the university. Professor Velthar was requested to appear before the council to present a comprehensive report on humans and their potential threat level. He was given permission to bring expert witnesses, specifically the human students who had been involved in the recent incidents. The council chambers were located on Nexus Station, a massive orbital platform that served as the Federation's administrative center. The station housed representatives from all 237 member species, along with thousands of support staff, diplomats and researchers. Hyejin, Daehyun, Minseo, and Jihoon arrived with Professor Velthar on a transport ship. As they disembarked, they were met by security officers from several different species. The humans were not under arrest, but the presence of armed guards made it clear that the council was taking this matter seriously. The main council chamber was enormous. The ceiling stretched high overhead, and curved rows of seats formed a semicircle facing a central platform. Each seat was designed for a different species' physiology, some filled with water for aquatic members, some containing high-pressure atmospheres for species from heavy gravity worlds, some simply empty space for energy-based beings. Currently, the chamber was not at full capacity. Only the security committee was present, a smaller group of 50 representatives tasked with evaluating potential threats to Federation stability. But 50 representatives meant 50 species, and the humans could feel the weight of their attention as they walked to the central platform. Professor Velthar approached the speaking podium, and the 4 humans stood behind him. A holographic display activated above the platform, ready to show visual evidence as needed. The committee chairperson, an ancient lithoid named Crystalline Resonance 7, activated their translation matrix. Their voice emerged as a clear musical tone that the universal translators converted into understandable speech. Professor Velthar, you have requested this session to present new findings regarding the species known as humans. The council has reviewed your preliminary report and the footage from the university arena. We are prepared to hear your full analysis. Professor Velthar bowed respectfully. Thank you, Chairperson. My initial research spanning 3 centuries concluded that humans were extinct. This conclusion was based on survey data and precursor archives that flagged humans as a potential galactic threat. Recent events have proven that conclusion false. Humans are not extinct. In fact, approximately 9 billion humans currently inhabit their home world, and they have been members of the Federation for 50 years. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber, surprised conversation in dozens of languages. The chairperson raised one crystalline appendage, calling for silence. The council is aware of these facts. What we need to understand is the risk assessment. If humans possess the traits documented by the precursors, why have they not demonstrated aggressive behavior during their time in Federation space? The professor touched his control panel, and the holographic display showed footage from Jihoon's arena match. Because humans have evolved beyond simple predatory instincts, they have developed something unique in galactic history: conscious choice that consistently overrides biological programming. He showed more footage, scenes from Earth showing human cities, schools, hospitals, and parks. Humans retain all the physical capabilities that made them apex predators. But observe how they use those capabilities. They apply their persistence to scientific research, working on problems for years or decades. They use their pack bonding ability to form complex societies based on mutual support rather than competition. They weaponize their innovations, yes, but they also develop strict ethical frameworks to govern when and how weapons can be used. A Vraxian representative stood, requesting permission to speak. The chairperson granted it. "We have seen the demonstration," the Vraxian said, his voice carrying undertones of respect and wariness. "One human exhausted 3 of our finest warriors. If humans can do this individually, what could they accomplish collectively? What happens if they decide to stop being peaceful?" Daehyun stepped forward and the professor nodded permission for him to speak. "May I address the council?" The chairperson considered, then agreed. "You may speak, human Daehyun." Daehyun moved to the podium, standing beside the professor. His voice was calm and clear as he addressed the assembled representatives. "You ask what happens if humans decide to stop being peaceful. That question assumes our peaceful behavior is temporary, a strategy rather than a choice. I understand why you might think that. Every instinct in your evolutionary history tells you that predators cannot be trusted, that aggression is inherent and unchangeable. But humans are different, not because we lack predatory instincts, but because we have spent thousands of years learning to control them." He gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show images of Earth's history, wars, destruction, but also recovery and rebuilding. "We have seen what happens when we give in to our worst impulses. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. We developed weapons capable of making our entire planet uninhabitable. We stood at the edge of extinction by our own hands. And in those moments, we made a choice. We chose to step back from the edge. We chose to build instead of destroy. We chose cooperation over domination." "Choice," the crystalline chairperson repeated, their musical voice thoughtful. "You speak of choice as if it is absolute. But choices can change. What guarantees that future humans will make the same choices?" Minseo stepped forward next. "May I speak, chairperson?" Permission was granted. Minseo's voice carried the confidence of someone who had spent years researching this exact question. "There are no absolute guarantees because humans are not machines. We are individuals with free will, but our choice for peace is not based on a single decision by one generation. It is encoded into our culture, our education, and our institutions. Every human child learns about the wars we fought, the mistakes we made, and the consequences we suffered. We teach our history not to glorify violence, but to ensure we never forget why we chose peace." She pulled up new data on the holographic display: statistics, social structures, and educational systems from Earth. "Look at how human civilization is structured now. We have global governance systems designed to resolve conflicts without war. We have economic structures that reward cooperation more than competition. We have art, literature, and philosophy that constantly reinforces the value of empathy and understanding. Our entire society is built around maintaining the choice for peace, even when our instincts might push us toward violence." A Nebulan representative, their gaseous form shifting colors to indicate curiosity, spoke up. "But what about individual humans? We have seen that a single human can be formidable. What prevents individual humans from acting aggressively, regardless of social structures?" Hyejin had remained quiet until now, but she felt this was her moment to speak. She approached the podium, her heart beating fast but her voice steady. "May I answer that, chairperson?" The chairperson gestured permission. Hyejin took a breath. "Yes, individual humans can be dangerous. We are all capable of violence if pushed to it. But we are also capable of compassion, friendship, and love. Every human carries both possibilities inside them. What determines which one we express is not just our personal choice, but the community around us." She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as she could. "Humans do not exist in isolation. We are social creatures. We form bonds with others, family, friends, colleagues, even strangers. Those bonds shape us. When a human acts with aggression, other humans respond. We have laws, social consequences, and moral frameworks that discourage violence and encourage cooperation. Not perfectly. We still have conflicts, still have individuals who choose violence, but as a species we consistently choose the community good over individual aggression. Why should we trust that?" asked a reptilian representative from a species Hyejin did not recognize. "You could simply be telling us what we want to hear." Jihoon finally spoke, his quiet voice somehow carrying through the entire chamber. "Because we have already been doing it. For 50 years, hundreds of humans have lived in Federation space. We have studied at your universities. We have worked on collaborative research projects. We have formed friendships with dozens of species. We have had opportunities to act aggressively or exploit our capabilities. All of them either destroyed themselves before achieving spaceflight or became galactic-level threats that required military intervention to contain. The news spread through the university like wildfire. Within hours of Professor Velthar's lecture, every student on campus had heard some version of the story. The supposedly extinct apex predators were not only alive, but had been living among them for years. The reactions varied wildly across species lines. Some students were fascinated and wanted to meet the humans, ask them questions, learn about Earth. Others were nervous, giving the human students wide berths in hallways and common areas. A few were openly hostile, believing that humans should never have been allowed into Federation space in the first place. Hyojin found herself at the center of attention wherever she went. Students would stop and stare, their various sensory organs focused on her as if she might suddenly transform into the monster from Professor Velthar's descriptions. She tried to maintain her composure, smiling politely and answering questions when approached. But the constant scrutiny was exhausting. On the third day after the lecture, things came to a head in the university's central plaza. Hyojin was walking between classes when she found her path blocked by a group of students. At the center of the group stood a Vraxian named Thalrix, a tall and powerfully built being covered in blue-black chitinous armor. The Vraxians were known throughout the Federation as the premier military species. They had not lost a war in 10,000 years. "So you are one of the humans," Thalrix said, his voice a deep rumble that carried easily across the plaza. Other students began to gather, sensing confrontation. The great predators we were all told to fear. Hyojin stopped, maintaining a careful distance. She kept her posture relaxed and non-threatening. "I am a student just like you, here to learn. The professor says your species is dangerous, that you are persistence hunters who chase prey until it dies of exhaustion, that you can survive injuries that would kill most other species, that you form emotional bonds with anything and use those bonds to coordinate attacks." Thalrix moved closer, and Hyojin could see that his natural weapons, sharp claws on each of his four arms, were extended slightly. Not quite threatening, but not peaceful either. "The professor was describing our evolutionary history," Hyojin said calmly. "What we were, not necessarily what we are now." "Evolution does not change in 50 years, Thalrix countered. "You are still predators. You simply hide it better now that you are outnumbered in Federation space. But what happens when more of you arrive? What happens when you no longer need to pretend?" A crowd had gathered now, students from dozens of species forming a loose circle around Hyojin and Thalrix. Hyojin noticed Daehyun at the edge of the crowd, watching carefully but not interfering. She understood why. If other humans rushed to defend her, it would only reinforce the idea that humans were dangerous and aggressive. "I am not pretending anything," Hyojin said. "I am exactly what I appear to be, a young woman trying to get an education." "Prove it," Thalrix said suddenly. "The university has combat simulation arenas for interspecies military training. Face me there. Show everyone that humans are not the threats we were warned about." Hyojin felt her stomach tighten. The last thing she wanted was to fight, but she could see the calculation behind Thalrix's challenge. If she refused, it would look like cowardice or an admission that humans were hiding something. If she accepted and lost, it would demonstrate that humans were not as dangerous as the legends suggested. And if she accepted and won, she was about to refuse anyway when a quiet voice spoke from the crowd. "I will take the challenge." Everyone turned. A human student pushed through the crowd, Ji-hoon, a third-year engineering student. Hyojin had seen him around campus but had never really spoken with him. He was thin and unremarkable in appearance, with slightly messy black hair and glasses that he probably did not need but wore anyway out of habit. He looked like the last person who should be accepting a combat challenge from a Vraxian warrior. Thalrix turned his attention to Ji-hoon, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "You? You look like you would break if I breathed on you too hard." Ji-hoon shrugged, his expression mild. "Maybe, but you offered a challenge to prove humans are not dangerous. I accept. When would you like to schedule the simulation?" The Vraxian studied him for a long moment, clearly trying to determine if this was some kind of trick. "Tomorrow. Dawn cycle. Standard survival hunt scenario. You as prey, me and 2 others as hunters. 3 against 1. Ji-hoon asked. "Yes, is that a problem?" "No," Ji-hoon said simply. "Just clarifying the terms. I will be there." The crowd dispersed slowly, students talking excitedly among themselves. Hyejin approached Jihoon as the plaza cleared. You did not have to do that. I could have handled Thalrix, Jihoon smiled slightly. I know, but you should not have to. Besides, I have been wanting to try the simulation arena since I got here. This seems like a good opportunity. You understand that Vraxians are the Federation's best warriors, right? Daehyun said, joining them. They have been bred and trained for combat for thousands of years. Thalrix is probably one of the top students in the military program. I know, Jihoon said. I have read about them. Very impressive species. Superior strength, speed, and natural weapons. Excellent tactical training. They really are remarkable. And you think you can beat 3 of them? Hyejin asked, concern clear in her voice. Jihoon's smile widened slightly. I think it will be interesting. See you both tomorrow at the arena? Before either of them could respond, he walked away, his hands in his pockets, looking perfectly calm and unconcerned. The next morning, the simulation arena was packed. Word had spread throughout the university, and students had arrived early to get good viewing positions. The arena itself was a massive space that could be configured to simulate various environments. For this match, it had been set as a forest environment. Dense trees, underbrush, a small stream running through the center, and realistic terrain variations. The observation deck wrapped around the arena in a wide circle, protected by energy shields. From there, spectators could watch the simulation unfold. Holographic displays showed different camera angles and participant vital signs. Professor Velthar stood in the observation deck with Hyejin, Daehyun, and Minseo. The professor had tried to cancel the match, arguing that it was inappropriate and potentially dangerous, but university regulations allowed students to use the arenas for sanctioned competitions. Thalrix had filed all the proper paperwork. This is a mistake, the professor said quietly, his 4 eyes fixed on the arena floor below. If the human wins, it will confirm everyone's fears. If he loses badly, it could result in serious injury despite the simulation's safety protocols. Jihoon knows what he is doing, Minseo said, though she did not sound entirely confident. Down in the arena, Jihoon stood at one end, wearing the standard simulation suit that would track his movements and vital signs. He still wore his glasses, which looked oddly out of place in a combat scenario. He carried no weapons. The simulation rules stated that prey could use only the environment. At the opposite end, Thalrix and 2 other Vraxians prepared themselves. They were impressive specimens, tall, armored, with natural weapons that could tear through most materials. They moved with the confidence of born predators. The simulation administrator's voice echoed through the arena. Rules are as follows. The prey has a 30-second head start to enter the environment. Hunters will then pursue. Victory conditions. Hunters win by tagging the prey with 3 confirmed strikes. Prey wins by evading hunters for 12 hours, or by eliminating all hunters through environmental tactics. Non-lethal safety protocols are active. Begin in 10 seconds. Hyejin felt her hands grip the railing in front of her. 12 hours? Could anyone, even a human, evade 3 Vraxian hunters for 12 hours? The timer hit 0. Jihoon immediately turned and ran into the forest. His movements were efficient, not panicked, just purposeful. He disappeared into the trees within seconds. 30 seconds later, the 3 Vraxians entered the arena. They moved as a coordinated unit, spreading out to cover more ground while maintaining visual contact with each other. Their heads swiveled as they scanned the environment, their enhanced senses searching for any sign of their prey. They found his trail almost immediately. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, footprints in soft earth. Jihoon had left an obvious path. The Vraxians followed it quickly, their confidence growing. This would be over in minutes. What the observers in the deck could see but the Vraxians could not yet realize was that Jihoon's trail was leading them in a wide circle. He was not running away from them. He was running in patterns. An hour passed, then 2. The Vraxians continued to chase, occasionally catching glimpses of Jihoon in the distance. He never stopped moving. When they got close, he would increase his speed just enough to stay ahead. When they slowed, he would slow too, maintaining the distance. By the 3rd hour, one of the Vraxians was breathing heavily. Vraxians were powerful sprinters, but sustained running was not their strength. They were designed for quick, devastating attacks, not marathon pursuits. By the 5th hour, the same Vraxian was struggling. His movements had become slower, less coordinated. The other two were still strong, but they're frustrated. 2 days passed before Professor Velthar called the humans back to his office. The room was different from the lecture hall, smaller, more personal, with walls lined with displays showing various alien specimens and archaeological artifacts. A large window overlooked the university campus, where students of dozens of species moved between buildings under 3 different colored suns. Hyejin and Daehyun entered together, finding the professor hunched over a massive holographic projection table. The surface glowed with data streams, and floating above it were 3-dimensional reconstructions of ancient Earth. The professor looked like he had not slept since their last meeting. His gray skin had a dull quality, and his movements seemed slower than before. "Thank you for coming," he said without looking up from his work. "I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing every piece of data we have on Earth. I needed to understand where my conclusions went wrong. What I found was both fascinating and deeply disturbing." He gestured for them to come closer to the projection table. With a wave of his hand, the hologram shifted to show a timeline stretching back thousands of years. The Galactic Survey Corps first detected Earth approximately 7,000 years ago, he began. At that time, humans had just begun developing agriculture and permanent settlements. The Survey Corps classified you as a pre-industrial species and placed monitoring satellites in orbit. Standard procedure for potentially developing civilizations. The hologram showed primitive human settlements, small clusters of buildings surrounded by farmland. For the next 5,000 years, the satellites recorded your development, and what they recorded was unprecedented. The professor's voice carried a mixture of academic fascination and underlying concern. Most species develop slowly, steadily, over tens of thousands of years. But humans? You went from simple agriculture to global civilization in just 5 millennia. That alone was remarkable. But it was how you developed that caught the attention of the Survey Corps. The timeline accelerated, showing human civilization spreading across Earth like a growing organism. Cities appeared, grew, and sometimes vanished. Lines representing trade routes crossed continents, but scattered throughout the timeline were bright red markers. Each red marker represents a major conflict, the professor explained. Wars involving thousands, then millions, then eventually billions of people. No other species in our records showed such consistent, large-scale violence while simultaneously advancing their technology and culture. Most predatory species either destroy themselves quickly or learn to cooperate. Humans did neither. You fought constantly while somehow continuing to build increasingly complex societies. Daehyun leaned forward, studying the timeline. "We call it the human condition. We are capable of both great beauty and terrible violence, sometimes simultaneously." The professor nodded slowly. "The Survey Corps documented everything. They were particularly interested in your weapons development. Every technological advancement you made was weaponized within a generation. Fire led to fire arrows. Metalworking led to swords and spears. Chemistry led to explosives. Nuclear physics led to atomic bombs. The pattern was consistent and alarming." He zoomed in on one section of the timeline, showing detailed images of ruined cities. "These are the images that convinced the Survey Corps and later me that humans had gone extinct. These ruins showed massive destruction, entire cities reduced to rubble, radiation levels high enough to kill most known life forms, environmental collapse. The evidence seemed conclusive." Hyejin studied the images carefully. She recognized some of the locations. Cities that had been rebuilt over centuries, their dark histories buried beneath modern streets and buildings. "When were these images taken?" 2,347 years ago, as we have now established," the professor said. At the time, the Survey Corps concluded that humanity had finally destroyed itself in a catastrophic final war. The satellites detected a dramatic decrease in human populations, widespread environmental damage, and societal collapse across most of your planet. They waited another 200 years, monitoring for any signs of recovery. When none appeared, or so they thought, Earth was officially classified as a dead world. The satellites were deactivated to conserve resources. "But we were recovering," Daehyun said, "just slowly. 200 years is barely enough time for humans to stabilize after a major collapse, let alone rebuild to detectable levels." "I understand that now," the professor said quietly. The Survey Corps was used to monitoring species with much longer lifespans. For a Krillian, 200 years is still young adulthood. For a lithoid, it is barely a moment. They did not realize that for humans, 200 years represents multiple generations, time enough to recover, rebuild, and begin growing again. He pulled up another set of images, these ones much more detailed. They showed archaeological sites, carefully excavated areas revealing layer upon layer of human civilization. I personally led 3 expeditions to Earth over the course of 200 years. I wanted to understand what had made humans such perfect predators. What I found exceeded my expectations. The hologram showed various artifacts, weapons, tools, and art from different time periods. Look at this progression. Stone tools that show evidence of complex planning and abstract thinking. Weapons designed not for immediate use but for specific future scenarios. Art depicting hunts and battles with sophisticated understanding of strategy and teamwork. And this? He highlighted one particular find. Evidence of humans caring for injured and elderly members of their groups. Predators do not typically waste resources on members who cannot hunt or fight. But humans did consistently. Yijin smiled slightly. We take care of our own. It is one of our defining traits. Yes, but do you understand how unusual that is? The professor asked, his voice rising slightly with emotion. Apex predators are typically solitary or operate in small family groups. They compete for resources. They abandon the weak. But humans? You formed communities of thousands, then millions. You cared for individuals who provided no survival advantage. You developed complex social structures based on cooperation and mutual support. And you did all of this while simultaneously being perfectly capable of extreme violence. He pulled up more images, these ones showing human settlements at various stages of development. Every layer we excavated told the same story. Humans building, destroying, and rebuilding, creating beautiful art and terrible weapons, developing philosophy and ethics while simultaneously waging wars. It was as if you were 2 different species occupying the same bodies. Daehyun crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. That is not entirely inaccurate. Humans have always struggled with our dual nature. We have the instincts of predators but the emotions and intelligence to question those instincts. Every human society has had to grapple with that contradiction. The professor moved to a different section of his office and pulled up another display. This one showed documents written in various alien languages, all marked with high security classifications. These are the precursor archives that I mentioned before. Access to these files is highly restricted. I only gained permission to view them because of my research focus on extinct predatory species. He opened one of the files, and a holographic document appeared. It was written in a flowing script that looked almost like art. Beside it, a translation scrolled in the Galactic Common Language. The precursors were an ancient civilization that existed millions of years before the current Federation. They monitored developing species across the galaxy, documenting their evolution and potential. When they discovered Earth, they flagged it with the highest threat rating they had ever assigned. The professor read from the document, his voice taking on a formal quality. Threat assessment for species designation human, planet designation Earth. Physical adaptations indicate apex predator evolution. Persistence hunting capability unprecedented. Endurance levels exceed all recorded species by factor of 3. Throw accuracy and power suggest specific evolutionary pressure for ranged attacks. Binocular vision optimized for predatory tracking. Omnivorous diet suggests extreme adaptability. Social structure indicates pack bonding behavior with potential for large-scale coordination. He paused, then continued. Psychological assessment. Species shows evidence of abstract thinking, long-term planning, and symbolic communication. Tool use sophisticated and rapidly advancing. Most concerning, species demonstrates emotional attachment patterns that extend beyond immediate family groups. Will bond with other species, inanimate objects, and abstract concepts. This behavior makes prediction of actions extremely difficult. Recommend continuous monitoring. If species achieve spaceflight capability, immediate containment protocols should be considered. The room fell silent. Yijin and Daehyun exchanged glances. The weight of the precursor's assessment hung in the air like a physical thing. They were afraid of us, Yijin said softly. A civilization millions of years more advanced than us, and they were afraid. With good reason, according to their analysis, the professor said. He pulled up another section of the archives. They documented several species similar to humans in evolutionary path. He was older than Hyejin, probably in his late 20s, and the other students filed out of the lecture hall slowly, their conversations buzzing with excitement and speculation. Some cast nervous glances back at Hyejin and Daehyun as they left. The Chitauri student who had sat next to Hyejin paused at the door, its antennae twitching in what might have been concern or curiosity, before finally departing. When the last student had gone, the doors sealed with a soft hiss. The lecture hall suddenly felt much larger and emptier. Professor Velthar stood at the front, his three-fingered hands gripping the edge of his podium. He stared at the two humans as if they were ghosts. "This is impossible," he said finally. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "My research spans 3 centuries. I personally analyzed data from 17 different expeditions to Earth. The evidence was conclusive." Daehyun walked down the steps from his back row seat, his movements careful and non-threatening. "May I see your data, Professor? I think there might be a calibration issue." Professor Velthar's 4 eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. He pulled up his personal archives on the main display. File after file appeared, floating in the air like translucent pages. Archaeological surveys, atmospheric readings, radiation signatures, fossil records. The professor had clearly spent a significant portion of his long life studying Earth. Hyejin moved to stand beside Daehyun, and together they examined the floating data. The professor watched them carefully, his posture tense. "Here," Daehyun said, pointing to a series of geological surveys. "Your dating method. You used Krillian standard chronological markers." "Of course," the professor said. "They are the most accurate in the galaxy." "For species with Krillian equivalent lifespans, yes," Daehyun agreed. "But humans live much shorter lives than Krillians. Our biological processes move faster. Your dating calculations were calibrated for a species that lives for 500 years on average. Humans live for around 80 to 100 years." The professor was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then his eyes widened. "The radioactive decay measurements would be read differently," Hyejin finished. "What you thought was 200,000 years of silence was actually closer to 2,000 years. Maybe less." Professor Velthar touched the controls with trembling fingers. He pulled up a new interface and began recalculating. Numbers flickered across the holographic display, cascading down in streams of data. The professor's gray skin had definitely gone paler now. 2,347 years, he read aloud. The survey was conducted 2,347 years ago, and the radiation signatures suggested the catastrophic event occurred about 3,000 years before that, Daehyun said, which would place it around 5,300 years ago, Galactic Standard. We call it the Bronze Age collapse and the subsequent Dark Ages, though the radiation signatures you found were probably from much later, around the 20th and 21st centuries, when we were learning to use nuclear technology. Learning to use it, the professor repeated hollowly. You developed weapons that could destroy your entire planet, and you call that learning? We also learned not to use them, Hyejin said. Well, not after the first few times. It took us a while to understand the consequences. Professor Velthar pulled up another file. This one showed images of Earth's surface, captured by the survey team 2,000 years ago. The planet showed clear signs of environmental damage, reduced forest coverage, atmospheric pollution, and scattered ruins of massive cities. Some areas still registered significant radiation levels. The survey team concluded that humans had destroyed themselves in a final war, the professor said slowly, his eyes fixed on the images. They saw the weapons, the environmental collapse, the extinction of numerous other species. They cataloged your history through the ruins. They found evidence of constant warfare, empire after empire rising and falling, each one more destructive than the last. The logical conclusion was extinction. The logical conclusion for most species, maybe, Daehyun said, but humans are stubborn. We don't go extinct easily. Hyejin pulled out her datapad again and scrolled through some files. Professor, humanity has survived multiple extinction-level events. Ice ages that covered half the planet. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years. Plagues that killed 30 to 50% of our population. Asteroids, floods, droughts. We nearly wiped ourselves out at least a dozen times with wars and environmental disasters. But we always survived, some of us anyway, enough to rebuild. She transferred more images to the main display. They showed progression over time, ruined cities being cleared, forests regrowing, populations recovering. The survey team saw us at one of our low points. We had just gone through a particularly destructive period. Wars involving the entire planet, weapons that could level cities in seconds, environmental damage that nearly made Earth uninhabitable. But we adapted. We changed. We developed new technologies to clean the air and water. We learned to cooperate instead of fighting. Slowly over centuries, we rebuilt. Professor Velthar sank into his chair at the podium. He looked genuinely shaken. I have spent 300 years studying your species. I wrote the definitive academic work on human predatory evolution. Every major university in the Federation uses my research as the prime example of why the Galactic Survey Corps monitors primitive species so carefully. I have given lectures to the Federation Council itself about the dangers of unchecked, predatory evolution. And you are telling me that everything I concluded was wrong? Not wrong exactly, Dahyun said diplomatically. Just incomplete. You were right about what we were. You just didn't know what we became. The professor looked up at him, all four eyes focusing intently. And what did you become? Dahyun exchanged a glance with Hyejin. She shrugged slightly, giving him permission to answer. Better, Dahyun said simply. We became better. Not perfect. We still have wars occasionally, still have conflicts and problems. But we learned to control our worst impulses. We developed philosophy, ethics, and laws. We created art and music. We built societies based on cooperation instead of just competition. We turned our aggression toward exploration and discovery instead of conquest. How? The professor's voice was barely audible. How does a species like yours simply choose to become peaceful? Every predatory species we have ever studied either remains aggressive or goes extinct. There is no middle ground, Hyejin stepped forward. Because we had to, Professor. We developed weapons powerful enough to destroy our entire planet. Every human alive knew that we stood at the edge of extinction by our own hands. We had a choice, change or die. Most species never face that choice so clearly. We saw what we could become if we continued down the path of violence. We saw the future of a dead Earth, empty and silent. And we chose differently. It wasn't easy, Dahyun added. It took centuries, generations. We still struggle with it sometimes. But we made a collective decision as a species that we wanted to survive. And that meant changing our behavior. The professor was quiet for a long moment. His fingers moved across his controls, pulling up more data. The precursor archives, he muttered. I accessed the sealed archives for my research. The precursors flagged Earth with the highest danger rating ever recorded. They documented your persistence hunting, your endurance capabilities, your ability to bond with anything, your technological advancement rate. They predicted that if humans ever achieved spaceflight, they would be unstoppable, a plague on the galaxy. The precursors were wrong too, Hyejin said softly, or at least incomplete. Yes, we have those capabilities. Yes, we could be dangerous, but we choose not to be. Choice, the professor said almost to himself. You say that word as if it is simple, as if choice alone could overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming. It's not simple at all, Dahyun said. It's the hardest thing we have ever done. Every human carries the instincts of our predatory past. Every one of us has the capacity for violence. But we also have the capacity for compassion, for empathy, for love. We choose which impulses to follow. That choice is what makes us human. Professor Velthar stood up slowly. He walked to the holographic display and stared at the current images of Earth. The thriving cities, the green forests, the blue oceans. I need to see your world, he said suddenly. I need to understand how this is possible. My entire life's work is based on the premise that your species is extinct. If that premise is wrong, then everything else might be wrong too. You are welcome to visit Earth anytime, Hyejin said. We have tourism programs for Federation citizens. Though I should warn you, it might be overwhelming. 9 billion humans in one place can be a lot to process. The professor turned to face them again. His expression was difficult to read, but something in his posture had changed. The shock was fading, replaced by curiosity, that same academic curiosity that had driven his research for 3 centuries. There is another matter, he said slowly. If humans are not extinct, then the Federation Council needs to be informed immediately. Your species was classified as a galactic-level threat. That classification has not been updated because we all believed you were gone. If the Council learns that there are humans in Federation space, that there have been human... The lecture hall buzzed with the soft sounds of alien conversation. Students from a dozen different worlds filled the curved rows of seats, their bodies as varied as the stars themselves. Some glowed faintly with bioluminescence, Others shifted between solid and gaseous states. A few looked almost like insects, their chitinous shells clicking softly as they settled into their places. At the front of the massive hall, Professor Velthar arranged his holographic displays. He was a Krillian, tall and elegant with smooth gray skin that seemed to shimmer under the lights. 4 eyes sat symmetrically on his elongated head, and his 3-fingered hands moved with practiced precision over the controls. He had taught at the Galactic University for almost 3 centuries, and this lecture was his favorite one to give. In the 3rd row, near the middle, sat Hyejin. She looked perfectly ordinary by human standards. Black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dark eyes focused on her datapad, wearing the standard university jumpsuit that all students wore. But in this classroom full of aliens, she was one of only 3 humans present. The other 2 sat separately, scattered among the 200 students filling the hall. Hyejin had gotten used to being stared at during her first few weeks at the university. Humans were still a novelty in the Galactic Federation. Earth had only joined 50 years ago, and even now most humans preferred to stay on their home world. The handful who ventured out into the wider galaxy were seen as curious oddities, brave or foolish, depending on who you asked. Professor Velthar activated the main display, and a massive hologram filled the air above the students. It showed a creature that looked like a nightmare made flesh, all teeth and claws and ridged armor plating. "Welcome, students, to advanced xenobiology," the professor said, his voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustic systems. "Today we discuss apex predators, specifically, the most dangerous species ever documented in galactic history." The students leaned forward with interest. This was why many of them had enrolled in the course. Professor Velthar's lectures on extinct predators were legendary across the university. "Let us begin with the Vrakath swarm hunters of the Delta Quadrant," the professor continued. The hologram shifted to show pack creatures moving with terrifying coordination. These beings hunted in groups of 50 to 100. They had no natural predators. Their homeworld's entire ecosystem evolved around their dominance. They went extinct 40,000 years ago, when their sun expanded unexpectedly. The professor moved through several more examples. Each one was more impressive than the last. The predator kings of Antari 7, who could survive in the vacuum of space. The nightmares of the Void Nebula, who had developed natural weapons that fired electromagnetic pulses. The silent death of Kepler 442b, who could change color and texture to match any environment perfectly. Each of these species, Professor Velthar explained, represented the pinnacle of predatory evolution in their respective ecosystems. Each one was studied extensively by the Galactic Survey Corps before their extinction. We learned much from their remains. A lithoid student, its crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns, raised one geometric appendage. "Professor, which one was the most dangerous?" Professor Velthar's 4 eyes seemed to glitter with something that might have been amusement, or perhaps unease. "An excellent question. The answer may surprise you." He tapped his controls and the hologram changed. Instead of showing a creature, it displayed a planet. A beautiful blue and green world with white clouds swirling across its surface. Hyejin recognized it immediately. It was Earth. "The most dangerous species in galactic history," Professor Velthar said slowly, "called their world Earth. They called themselves humans, and thankfully, for the sake of every civilization in this galaxy, they went extinct approximately 200,000 years ago." The lecture hall filled with interested murmurs. Several students made notes on their datapads. A few looked at the rotating image of Earth with academic curiosity. Hyejin sat very still. Her hand hovered over her datapad, not quite touching it. She glanced to her left, then to her right, but she was seated between a gaseous nebulan and an insectoid Chitauri. Neither of them seemed to notice her reaction. "The humans of Earth," the professor continued, "were perhaps the most perfectly designed predators ever to evolve naturally. Let me show you why." The hologram shifted to display a bipedal figure. It looked remarkably similar to several other species in the galaxy, including the professor himself. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. But the professor began highlighting specific features. "Observe the forward-facing eyes. Binocular vision for perfect depth perception. This is a hunting trait, not a prey trait. Prey animals have eyes on the sides of their heads to watch for danger. Predators have forward-facing eyes to track their targets." He zoomed in on the hands. "Opposable thumbs on manipulator appendages. capable of wielding tools and weapons with extreme precision. Now look at the shoulder structure. Humans evolved specifically to throw objects. This rotation range, he demonstrated with his own arm, allowed them to hurl stones and spears with deadly accuracy. No other species ever evolved this specific adaptation. Eugene's hand slowly rose into the air. She kept it there, waiting patiently for the professor to notice, but he was focused on his lecture, his enthusiasm growing as he spoke. Their skeletal structure shows evidence of extreme persistence. They could run for days without stopping. Literally days. They would chase prey animals until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. Then the humans would simply walk up and kill them. This is called persistence hunting, and it is one of the most terrifying hunting strategies ever documented. Another student asked, "But Professor, many species hunt in packs. Why were humans special?" "Because," Professor Velthar said, his voice dropping slightly, "humans didn't just hunt in packs. They pack-bonded with anything. The archaeological evidence shows they domesticated other predators. They took wolves, apex predators themselves, and turned them into hunting companions. They formed emotional attachments to their prey animals and kept them as livestock. They even formed bonds with inanimate objects, giving names to their weapons and tools." Yejin's hand was still raised. A Shatari student next to her finally noticed and made a soft clicking sound, trying to get the professor's attention. Professor Velthar continued, now displaying images of ancient human settlements. Their civilization showed signs of unprecedented violence. They fought wars using atomic weapons. They drove hundreds of species to extinction through hunting and habitat destruction. The fossil record shows evidence of at least 6 major extinction events caused directly by human activity. And then finally they destroyed themselves. The radiation signatures and collapsed cities suggest a final catastrophic war that rendered their world uninhabitable. By the time the Galactic Survey Corps discovered Earth 2,000 years ago, humans had been extinct for millennia. "Professor," someone called out. It was the Chitauri clicking insistently. "One of the students has a question." Professor Velthar turned, his 4 eyes finally focusing on Hyejin's raised hand. "Yes, you have a question about the extinct humans?" Hyejin lowered her hand slowly. She looked directly at the professor, her expression calm and completely neutral. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "Professor, with all due respect, humans are not extinct. Earth is still inhabited. I'm from there." The lecture hall went completely silent. Professor Velthar stared at her. All 4 of his eyes widened simultaneously. "I beg your pardon?" Hyejin pulled out her personal datapad and stood up. Her fingers moved quickly across the surface, and a moment later, her display synced with the main holographic projector. The image of ancient Earth was replaced by a live feed. The feed showed a bustling city at night. Towers of glass and steel stretched into the sky, illuminated by millions of lights. Flying vehicles moved between the buildings, and everywhere moving through the streets and buildings were humans, millions of them. "This is Seoul," Hyejin said calmly. "Current timestamp today, population 8 million. Here's Tokyo, population 13 million. New York, population 19 million. Lagos, population 15 million. Shall I continue?" She swiped through several more feeds, each showing thriving human cities packed with people, vehicles, and technology. The professor's gray skin had taken on a slightly pale quality. "Earth's current population is approximately 9 billion humans," Hyejin continued. "We joined the Galactic Federation 50 years ago. We have 3 embassy stations in Federation space and ongoing trade agreements with 47 member worlds. I'm here as part of the student exchange program. I believe there are currently 312 humans studying at various Federation universities." The lecture hall erupted. Students started talking all at once, their various forms of communication, creating a cacophony of sound. Some were excited, others confused. A few looked frightened. Professor Velthar held up one hand, calling for silence. It took several moments for the noise to die down. When he spoke again, his voice sounded strained. "There must be some mistake. My research clearly shows—" "Your research is based on a survey conducted 2,000 years ago," a new voice said. Hyejin turned to see Daehyun, another human student, standing up from his seat near the back of the hall.